Man, oh man. Welcome back to another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. I'm your host, GT Rain. Joined alongside me is the man from up north, Stu, off in the Esses. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty good. Nothing's really happened since we last spoke, has it?
No, we got a pretty boring episode for you. No driver news, nothing
No.
to discuss. Of course you were kidding. The sports car racing world is never really truly quiet, although for the first time in I feel like a while we don't have a race to either preview or review, which is a bit of a change of pace. Unfortunately, no Las Vegas Grand Prix or Macau Grand Prix on this podcast. But we do have a ton of driver news to announce. It feels like the IMSA nuclear bomb of driver swap news dropped all on one day. I forget exactly what day it was now, some point last week, I want to say. And you made a whole video about it, going over all of that news. And frankly, there's so much to discuss that you and I made the executive decision to focus on mainly the pro class announcements for this podcast. And then maybe we'll try to delve into some of those lower M class announcements in future episodes. So I'll start things off today. The piece of news, I guess one of the only WEC pieces of news that we got in the past week or so, or past 2 weeks rather, for drivers, was this morning. Nick DeVries is now officially confirmed to be joining the number 7 car for Toyota Gazoo Racing next year in the GR010. He will be replacing Jose Maria Lopez, who has been with the team since 2017, if you want to count the 24 Hours of Le Mans, 2018 full-time. He'll be joining Mike Conway and Kumi Kobayashi in that car. No driver lineup change to the number 8 car. With that announcement, Ritomo Miata will be joining Toyota as a reserve driver, replacing the role that Nick DeVries once had. And once again, I reaffirm my belief that F1 is a feeder series for sports car racing. Jose Maria Lopez, if you're wondering what's going to be happening with him, don't worry. He's still going to be racing in the FIA WEC full-time. He'll be joining the new CODIS ASP, weird to say Lexus program for next year in the LMGT3 class. I know we've always associated that team being a Mercedes team in the past probably close to a decade or so. Maybe not quite that long, but he'll be joining their Lexus program for that class next year. With 2 cars planned in that class. First driver announced for that, and we're still waiting to hear when the other drivers may be announced for that program. Not the only experience for Jose Maria Lopez in GT racing. In fact, if you look back to the 2007 America Le Mans Series, he raced a Ferrari F430 in the GT2 class at the 12 Hours of Sebring and St. Petersburg. So, good 15 plus years, 16 years since that last GT2 experience in sports car racing, but returning to the ranks next year. Stu, I don't know if you have a whole lot to add to this. I know we had talked about this before. Nick DeVries was, I feel like, a long time rumored to be joining that 7 car, but officially having it confirmed now, I think is a great pickup for them. He had a great showing when he raced for Racing Team Nederland in the LMP2 class a couple seasons back.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, very strong driver. Anybody who eventually does make it, well, not anybody that makes it to Formula One, I suppose, but anybody that has had such a, he's still young, but he's had a long career, a successful career on his way, his climb up to Formula One and in sports car racing, as you mentioned, along the way. This is obviously a great pickup. If you're Toyota, you're not going to be putting somebody in the car full time that you don't think is ready for that role. And I think this is kind of the perfect opportunity for Toyota as well as DeVries to hop in, take advantage of this opportunity. And yeah, it's just another great driver in the Toyota organization. One of the things that I thought was interesting from this news is more tied to the Jose Maria Lopez Lexus connection there, and it got me thinking when I was thinking about this today, and knowing that in the trying to tie IMSA into this a little bit, in the GTD class, Vassar Sullivan, former Vassar, well, we don't know if he's a former driver at this point, but Aaron Telitz was a former driver in the Vassar Sullivan Lexus program, and I wonder if I'm not sure. I think he might be a silver driver. I believe he was the AM rated driver in that car. I wonder if he could be a candidate to come over and join this WEC effort for next season. Tremendous amount of experience with that car, obviously. A strong driver. I think it might make a lot of sense. But I don't know. That's what that's one of the first things that came to my mind when I saw that news.
Yeah, go ahead. Throw your darts on the board, see if they stick. It's one of the many games in sports car racing that we love to play. I haven't really put too much thought into who we may see in that car apart from Jose Maria Lopez yet, although we'll be discussing later on in the episode the full WEC entry list is pretty imminent, so we shouldn't be having to wait too long to see that news. Moving over to an additional prototype for next year, a new prototype for next year, the long-awaited and very hyped up Lamborghini LMDH program that will be racing in the IMSA Michelin Endurance Cup rounds and full season in the FIA World Endurance Championship. We got our first 2 confirmed drivers for the actual race programs today. Daniel Kvyat and Andrea Caldarelli will be racing. Kvyat is joining from Prema Racing in the LMP2 ranks in the WEC, and he'll be racing in the WEC next season. And Caldarelli, longtime Lamborghini factory driver, will be racing in the IMSA, like I said, the Michelin Endurance Cup rounds. No full season program, unfortunately, for next season. As we've already discussed, 1 car in each series for next year. And we'll see beyond that if we get any additional entries down the road. And I know there's been some other drivers who have been testing that car. Mirko Bortolotti and Romain Grosjean have been out testing that car, but no official confirmation on where they may slot into the race programs quite yet. So, I noticed you added some notes here that I actually didn't see before. I'll let you pick it up, though.
I did. So I was surprised. I'm not surprised that Andrea Caldarelli being sort of confirmed as the first IMSA program driver, and Kvyat being named to the WEC makes total sense. One thing that surprised me is I thought that Caldarelli had participated in more races on the North American side of the pond in recent years, but it turns out only 9 races, many of them with Paul Miller Racing, and when they were with Lamborghini, and has a Rolex 24 under his belt. But yeah, only 9 races. I was a little bit surprised, and I think I saw a quote that he was eager to race in the IMSA championship. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting. Not a ton of IMSA experience, but obviously a tremendous amount of experience in some of the largest sports car and GT3 races around the world. So going to be good to see him take that step up with that beautiful looking Lamborghini.
Yeah, of course, on track for a debut at the 1,812 kilometers, also known as, I believe that's an 8-hour race, over in Qatar, because it will not reach that full distance, I promise. And then an IMSA debut at the 12 Hours of Sebring a couple of weeks later. So very much looking forward to seeing that program, very much looking forward to seeing the full driver rosters for both of those programs, and more announcements in the coming weeks. So we got a driver change in the GTP ranks, a driver from the hypercar category over in the WEC now joining the GTP ranks in IMSA. Do you want to take that story?
Yeah, sure. So that is Richard Westbrook is making the switch from the Cadillac in the WEC championship over to the JDC Miller Motorsports Porsche 963 in IMSA. Of course, you'll recall he ran the full season last year in the WEC, again, in that lovely number 2 blue Cadillac. He's going to be replacing Mike Rockenfeller as the primary full season driver in that entry. You know, not a bad replacement. You know, you're losing Rocky, but Richard Westbrook is no slouch himself. And of course, he's going to be pairing up with Tymon Vanderhelm in the full season ride there. Phil Hansen is the Michelin Endurance Cup Series driver for that program. And Little bit surprising, I think, was the fourth driver for that program in Ben Keating. I think that was a bit of a surprise. I mean, there is history there. Keating ran with JDC Miller Motorsports. I can't remember what year it was, but I do believe that they picked up a podium in the DPI class when he ran. So Ben Keating wants to dip his toes into whatever racing he can, and he has he's going to be quick. He's going to show good pace. He's arguably the best bronze driver in the world right now, and have no doubt that he's going to step in and do a good job in that LMDH car. And then just to sort of cap that all off, Mike Rockenfeller, not gone out of racing at any point. He's landed a pretty good ride himself with is Ford Multimatic Motorsports as one of the full season drivers for them in the GTD Pro class of IMSA. What were your thoughts when we saw this whole JDC lineup come together?
Yeah, I don't think it was one of those stories that I was really expecting. But like you said, I can echo a lot of what you said. I think he's a great driver for them to pick up. Westbrook, I think, has been pretty impressive this year in the World Endurance Championship, a podium, overall podium at Le Mans. Still well and kicking after all the years that he's been racing in sports car racing, especially in North American sports car racing, starting back with the American Le Mans series. The announcement of Ben Keating, I know that's going to be a big fan favorite as well. Not really correct you, but to add more information to what you said, I believe it was 2022 when Keating raced for JDC at Daytona. It might have been 2021, but I'm 85% sure it's 2022.
I think you're right. Right.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what performance he can put up in a brand new GTP car. Like you said, it seems like any car you throw him in, he's one of the few drivers. In fact, he's the driver who raced the most different variations of GTE cars, if I'm not mistaken. All of them except, I believe, BMW, and that might have been it.
Did he race a Ferrari?
Yes, he did race a Ferrari in the WEC. So I'm almost certain he did. I'm excited to see what kind of performance he can put up in that GTP car at Daytona, like you said. Also, did want to mention, because I see quite a few people in the chat right now, if you have any questions that you want us to answer in this episode, we'll get to those at the end, or we'll try to section them in nicely to what we're currently discussing. I noticed a couple new names in the chat here. Ewan Wayne, it's great to see you here. I know it's pretty late over in the UK, so appreciate you tuning out, at least for the start of this episode. Glad you were finally able to make it over to one. And also anybody else who's either a repeat listener or a new viewer as well. Appreciate you tuning in.
And we got confirmation it was 2022. Good. Thank you.
I needed that validation. Continuing with the IMSA GTP news, we got more announcements for the Rolex 24, and that is that Jenson Button and Marcus Ericsson will be racing for Wayne Taylor Racing with Andretti Autosport at the Rolex 24 in January.
I love that feeder series.
That feeder series, I'm telling you. Jenson Button will be racing in the new number 40 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura alongside Jordan Taylor, Louis Delatraz, and Colton Herta. And Marcus Ericsson will be making only his second IMSA race. Past one was the 2022 Rolex 24 for the number 2 Cadillac Chip Ganassi Racing Team. Ericsson will be racing alongside Ricky Taylor, Felipe Albuquerque, and Brendan Hartley in the number 10 car. Two very strong signings, I think. Again, it's going to be great to see Jenson Button back in a GTP car. He put up a phenomenal performance at Petit Le Mans this year. And if nothing else, the amount of fan attention that he brought to Petit Le Mans, with me standing in that autograph line for 45 minutes to have him sign a banana that I threw in the trash 5 minutes later. It's great. It's great to have that international attention at the Rolex 24 this year, or next year rather.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, like, look at the grid that we're going to have. Some of the drivers that we either already have, many of the drivers that we already have, or some of the drivers that we expect to be on the grid. I mean, there's so many high profile drivers that are coming. We just talked about Nick DeVries. I know he's not going to be on the Rolex grid, but coming into sports car racing now, full time, it's sounds like this is going to be his main thing, at least for this upcoming season. Jenson Button is seems to be diving, head first into it. Although it's, I guess, a spinoff of this news and relating to Button is, do you think that this pretty much solidifies him staying in the or going to the WEC for a full season ride, probably with Joda?
I know there's still been talks about it. I don't know if this really adds any validation to those rumors. I would certainly love to see him racing full time in a second Joda car in the WEC, but I don't know if it really speaks volumes to that news. I think that this is sort of a more separate thing, but like I said, no complaints from the announcement for Daytona.
It's probably going to be difficult to see him racing, unless if it's other one-off appearances in IMSA, though, I would think. Because he's not going. I don't see him doing this one-off race with Acura and then going to another team. But I guess stranger things have happened.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, if he performs well at Daytona, I don't think there's anything really holding him back, unless Porsche jumps out of the blue and signs Jenson Button as a factory driver. Then I guess that would shoot that plan down for the future. But I don't really expect that to be happening. I think, perhaps we do see Jenson Button back in the Wayne Taylor Racing Acura for future performances.
Yeah. And I also find it interesting how Wayne Taylor Racing is dividing up some of these lineups. It's, you have your not that the number 40 car isn't full of proven drivers. They're very, very strong and very proven core four, but you look at the number 10 that has Ricky Taylor, Felipe Albuquerque, and Brandon Hartley as the Endurance Cup core, adding Ericsson on for the Rolex. And then, you have Jordan Taylor. He's been out of sport. He's been out of prototypes for a couple of years. Luis Delatraz, he's of course been with Wayne Taylor for the past year. Lots of prototype experience. Colton Herta and Jenson Button. That's an exciting lineup in that number 40. Not that the number 10's not exciting, but I don't know what the point was that I was looking to make out of this. But that's a very fun lineup, I think, that number 40, the number 40 has.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say. I've made a point many times in the past that especially for big races like the Rolex 24 or 24 Hours of Le Mans, I really love when we have international and national talent recognized at those races. People from IndyCar or F1 fans can go view the race and they can see drivers that they're already familiar with, even if it's their first time watching a sports car race. And I think that actually speaks. I think that really does a lot for people watching those events for the first time, gives them maybe a driver or a team to root for. And I've said it before, I think anytime we get an IndyCar driver on the grid, a current IndyCar driver, a former F1 driver, it's really fantastic for that event. So with Andretti, with Wayne Taylor Racing, we're getting Colton Herta, current IndyCar driver. We're getting Jenson Button, former F1 driver.
That's
really
going to be a long line for autographs. The Wayne Taylor Racing
I'm not even going to attempt it. So we got some GTD Pro news, starting with the team north of the border, up from your land.
Yeah, up in Canada land, we have. I need to go and put on my plaid for this, or maybe not. Who knows? But Pfaff Motorsports, of course, they have announced their full season lineup. Actually, the full season. They've announced their whole lineup, not just the full season. Oliver Jarvis and Marvin Kirchhofer. I think I'm pronouncing that somewhat close to correct. They will be the full-time drivers for that McLaren 720S GT3 car next year. Of course, again, in case you missed it, making the switch over from Porsche over to McLaren for next season. Sticking in GTD Pro, though. They have a pretty high-profile Endurance Cup driver that's going to be joining them as well in James Hinchcliffe. Noteworthy here, he will not be with the team for the 2 6-hour races. The GTD Pro cars, as well as the GTP class cars, are able to only run 2 drivers in that 6-hour race. It's not to say that they won't add a third, but James Hinchcliffe will not be racing with them, at least as of right now, for those 2 races. And then joining them for the Rolex 24, I feel like all we've been talking about is, F1 drivers. We have tons of IndyCar drivers. Well, we have another one, Alexander Rossi, no slouch himself, and he will be joining that car for the Rolex 24. A fairly strong lineup, I would say here. Good to see Ollie Jarvis come back to the GT ranks. Spent, I'm not sure how many years. I think this is his first real proper GT season since maybe he raced Bentley. Race with
I want to
Bentley's
say
program.
that's correct. I was trying to think back myself. I know Bentley, I think 2020 is the last time he raced for them.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing I noticed looking at the entire lineup when I look at the lineup in general. James Hinchcliffe, I'm trying to remember the last time he raced in IMSA.
I think he may have only raced like one or two times previously.
He raced with Mazda back when it was the Skyactiv prototype. Alexander Rossi, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this will be his first time in a GT car. So unless he raced it in the junior ranks, but I'm pretty sure he went up through the open wheel junior formula for the majority of his career. So maybe there's a couple, one or two races that I'm missing, but I'm pretty sure he's a pretty new driver to GT racing. I'll be interested to see how that lineup performs. It's a complete overhaul for FAF racing. No drivers carried over from this season. And of course, like you said, a new car as well.
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic that there won't be many growing pains, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's a few growing pains here. But it's going to be great to see a McLaren up in the top class of GT racing in IMSA, anyways, up in the pro ranks, and just to see another McLaren full time on the grid. I feel like we've been kind of deprived of those McLarens here the past few years. So good to see another one confirmed on the grid full time.
Hey, Stu, you know where Alexander Rossi raced in 2015?
Where did he race in 2015?
He raced in F1.
Oh, really?
It's a theater series.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I guess, we'll take all these washed up F1 drivers, right?
They're not washed up, man. You're talking Jenson Button, who's an F1 champion. Has his own miniseries on Hulu right now. Or Disney Plus if you're in Canada.
True.
Anyway, sticking with the GTD Pro ranks, Paul Miller Racing, which, that was not a mistake, Paul Miller Racing will be making the transition to GTD Pro for next season, up from the GTD ranks this year. Of course, they are the reigning GTD champions in that class. Same driver lineup for the full season, Brian Sellers and Madison Snow, although we do have a couple of new drivers racing in the endurance race and at the Rolex 24. Neil Verhagen will be joining them for the endurance races. Now, I didn't catch if that includes the 6-hour races for that team or not. I'm kind of hoping you would pick that up for me, although I don't want to put you on the spot. While you try to get an answer for that, Sheldon Vanderlyn will be racing that car in the Rolex 24. He just raced in the BMW M Hybrid V8 this year at the Rolex 24, now going to the GTD Pro ranks. And I can see you furiously Googling this right now.
I don't know if I'll find it. I think that he is that Verhagen is going to be joining for the for all of the Endurance Cup races, but I am not 100% certain on that.
Yeah,
but strong lineup, and he did a really good job in that BMW M4 GT3 last season. So,
yep. Is it just me? Because the trend I'm noticing here is that it seems like there's a lot more 4-car teams for the Rolex 24 than we've had previous seasons, especially the last probably good 5 to 10 years. Ever since it's been the converged IMSA series between the ALMS and Grand M, it feels like I haven't seen this many 4-car lineups pretty much ever.
Yeah, I don't know if I've noticed. I mean, to be fair, the last handful of years, I think, well, no, you could run a 3-car lineup in some of the Pro-Am classes? I don't remember.
Oh yeah, you could run 4 drivers previous seasons, and there definitely were teams that were doing it at Daytona, but I don't remember it to this extent.
I can't say that that anything stuck out to me on that.
Just something I noticed, maybe, especially in the GTP ranks. It feels like most of those are only where 3-car teams the past couple of years. Also, we got Ewan here. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, by the way. Mentioning, good point, that 4 drivers in GTD Pro and GTP will be mandatory from 2025, which is probably encouraging more teams to do it right now. Great point. Completely forgot about that news from about a month ago, and makes complete sense as to why you might want to get some additional drivers that experience a year early. As long as we don't bring back the days of 7 drivers in the top class.
Yeah. And there's also an adjustment that's coming for those the shorter Endurance Cup races as well. So the Sebring and Petit Le Mans this year require 3. And starting next season, the 2 6-hour races, the Watkins Glen and Indy, will also require 3. So gonna get to see more drivers on the grid, which, you always like to see more opportunity for former F1 drivers to come over as well.
Yeah. I think the last bit of actually, no, there's a couple more pieces of GTD Pro news to discuss. Corvette racing, and this is where we're going to dip into the GTD lineups a little bit. But Daniel Juncadella, I'm killing these name pronunciations tonight, and Earl Bamber will be joining Corvette racing for the endurance races in IMSA. Juncadella will be racing the number 3 car alongside Antonio Garcia and Alexander Sims, and Earl Bamber will be joining Tommy Milner and Nicky Katzberg in the number 4 car. Of course, Earl Bamber coming over from the Cadillac ranks in the FIA World Endurance Championship in that GTP car. I'll still be sticking with that team for next year, but also joining IMSA for the endurance races for next season. In the GTD side of things, we also got the announcement at the same time that Charlie Eastwood and Nico Raurone would be joining AWA in the number 17 GTD customer racing Corvette. First time we're seeing customer Corvettes in North America in a really, really long time. Verne will be racing the full season alongside Anthony Mantella, and Charlie Eastwood will be racing at the Rolex 24. Both Eastwood and Juncadella will be racing full-time in the FIA WEC next year for TF Sport with their Corvette Z06 GT3R program as well. So, Corvette racing, we're going to have 4 Corvettes on the grid next year. And like I said, It's been a very long time since we've had customer Corvettes racing in IMSA. Corvette racing and Corvette as a brand in general probably still bring in some of the most amount of IMSA fans you'll see around the racetrack. So any additional Corvettes on the grid is great news as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, you go to pretty much any IMSA race and they have the big Corvette corral as well. There's no shortage of Corvette fans. And to add, I mean, technically we're adding 3 more Corvettes on the grid from what we had last year. So more Corvettes to cheer for. There's going to be, I think that's going to make a lot of fans very happy. Good to see as well that those Pratt Miller Motorsport Corvettes, they are largely maintaining that sort of iconic Corvette yellow livery. There's a few more sponsor logos and corporate logos on there now, but good to see that they've managed to largely maintain that, at least to this point. And then great for AWA, making the step up from LMP3. They're getting in with a great brand in Corvette. They actually just took delivery of those cars. I think it was yesterday. So, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz around the Corvettes, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of fans following them around when they head to Daytona early next year.
Yeah, and of course, Nico Veron joining AWA. He raced for them in that LMP3 car for this season, going to the GTD ranks for next year.
He didn't have a good year last year at all either, did he? Only a Rolex.
Not in the WEC, he certainly didn't.
Yeah, no.
Not with that Le Mans win in that championship, but the championship that was wrapped up in Monza, mind you. Final piece, though, of GTD news. I will let you take this one.
Yeah, so AO Racing, one of the big I don't think anybody really thought too much of them when we saw the entry list revealed last season. They showed up to the Rolex, and their popularity really took off when they unveiled their full season livery, which has become affectionately known as Rexy. So we don't know if Rexy is going to be returning to the grid next year, although I have a feeling that it'd be difficult for them to get rid of it right now. But they have announced their GTD Pro effort. They're sticking with Porsche, and the two drivers that will be driving that car for the full season are Seb Prio and Lauren Heinrich, who hopefully nailed that name.
I think you did.
So they are going to be racing the car for the full season. We're still waiting on confirmation for the Endurance Cup drivers, and we are also still waiting on confirmation. I like how AO Racing pointed this out in their press release, that the livery will be confirmed in the coming weeks as well. So, and because everybody's going to ask about, is Rexy returning?
I'm sure they'll bring it back. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's free advertising. Every time somebody makes a social media post about it.
It's brand association.
Of course. And I think Hot Wheels struck a deal with them too last year. So
yeah, I think that's supposed to be released at some point in 2024. I think. Can't believe it takes a while to get those things out.
Yeah, I will say Seb Prio. My first real experience with Seb Prio, who's still a very young driver, by the way, was at the 2021 6 Hours of the Glen. He was still racing in Porsche Carrera Cup North America, and I'll say that if he didn't win, I think there were 2 races that weekend. If he didn't win both races, he definitely won one of them. And an extremely strong driver that I immediately picked out early on in that weekend. So it's great to see him racing in the GTD Pro class for the full season next year. And I'm very excited to see what type of performance he can put up in that Porsche for AO Racing next year.
Yeah, he was very, very strong. I think he was one of the, I think he was behind one of those very dominant Porsche Carrera Cup seasons for sure. Very good, very strong driver.
Yeah. So if nothing else, I am going to wrap things up on the news section here with the small announcement, I guess, that yesterday was the final day to register for an entry for the 2024 FIA WEC, with the full entry list planned on being released next Monday. So, like we said in last episode, we're expecting to see 37 cars for the full season between Hypercar and the LMGT3 class. There was an entry list that was leaked for that championship for next season. I'm not really going to touch on it because I would rather wait until we actually have those things confirmed before I get my hopes up or start spreading misinformation once again on this podcast. So, unfortunately, we don't have a podcast for next week, but the following week we will be able to recap all of those announcements. We already sort of gave a bit of a preview last episode, what we expect to see in the LMGT3 category. But I think that there's still a couple of entries in the hypercar class that are a bit up in the air. So I'm excited to see what we get for that class next season. So, got a handful of questions, both from last time we did an episode. There were a couple of late questions that we had. We had a couple of questions before the show today. And, of course, a couple questions during the episode as well. So I'll let you kick those off. And I do want to mention that, of course, now that we're in the question part of this episode, you can feel free to leave some of those down below, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can before we wrap up the episode. So I'll let you kick things off.
All righty. So, yeah, we had a few that were they were late entrants for the last time we did a call for questions. So the first one that we have from Chico Zilla 1988 on YouTube. Do you think Cadillac is capable of handling the WEC with a single car effort next year compared to the other manufacturers? Or do you think they should add a sister car to back the Blue 2? I know we talked about this, I think, a few weeks ago, but let's jog the memory a little bit here. What you think? What are your thoughts on Cadillac having a one car factory effort versus lots of the other factory efforts that are two car entries?
Yeah, I've talked about this a couple times on the podcast, dating back to probably a couple months back at this point. Um, it, of course, puts them at a disadvantage. When you look at a championship that's built around endurance racing, one of the biggest things you can do as a team in endurance racing is have multiple bullets in the chamber. Talked about the advantages for that in the past, whether it's more data to grab for setups when you're starting a new race, especially next season with the WEC. We have, I think, 3 new tracks for the hypercars joining the calendar with Qatar, Imola, actually 4, because we have Qatar, Imola, Brazil, and Coda, which Coda has never featured any races with the new hypercar category. So if you're going into a race like that and you don't really have you have the same practice time as everybody else. Sure, you can go out and do some private testing at some of those tracks if you want. I know Cadillac's done some testing at Imola, but strictly speaking, if you're going there on a practice or for free practice, you're not really going to have as much data to sift through as you would with a 2-car team. Also, if you end up in a scenario where you get some rain and you might want to use a car that's lower down as a guinea pig, that's played an advantage for a bunch of teams in the past in endurance racing. There's many reasons I could go on and on about the advantages of having 2 cars versus 1. We've heard from Laura Winthrop-Klauser that the main reason they're only running 1 car in that championship right now is strictly for budget reasons. And I hope with the recent announcement that Cadillac is fully invested in creating their own power unit for the 2028 F1 season, whether or not that actually goes through, that it doesn't end up affecting their sports car racing programs in any way. But, of course, it's expensive to run a car in the World Endurance Championship, and the situation that Cadillac's in right now allows them to only run 1 car. So I'll take that 1 car over no cars racing full-time, but like you said, and like I've said in the past, it definitely puts them at a disadvantage.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see them bring another car over, or at least one other car over for Le Mans. I think, and I think
we will.
Yeah,
I think we can expect that. Now, what I will say is Cadillac actually, if you look at their performance this season, if you exclude the second half of the season after Le Mans, they actually had probably the 3rd strongest car on the grid in the hypercar category behind Toyota and Ferrari. They were consistently doing better than Porsche in the first half of the season. They finished on the podium at Le Mans, something that Porsche couldn't say. And so it's not to say that by running 1 car, it immediately excludes them from any potential of winning a race. I think they have the lineup and they have the team behind them to get a result like that. It just makes it a little bit more difficult, I think.
Yeah. I agree completely.
So we got another question. What do you think is the reasoning behind Pfaff's, surprising I'd say, switch to McLaren? Is it perhaps they wanted to run a GTP program in the future? They wanted to be a factory team of a manufacturer, and that clearly won't happen with Porsche. So they went with McLaren, who's already confirmed that they will make an LMDH car. I don't believe that was confirmed. What are your thoughts? So I also touched on this a couple of episodes back. I believe with Pfaff, it's no secret that they just wanted a little bit more factory support. Like you said, there's not going to be that full factory backing from Porsche and a GT program right now, and neither are they going to get that like a full factory program from McLaren, but they are probably in it for more support right now than they were getting from Porsche. And I think that that's the primary reason they would switch. You could also perhaps make the argument that they were struggling this season with balance of performance racing that Porsche, although I wouldn't say that that's a primary reason for them to switch that car. As for potentially running a GTP car in the future, if you're planning to run a GTP car, I think switching from Porsche to McLaren would be the opposite of a good move, considering that Porsche right now has perhaps the strongest customer, or in fact, definitely the strongest customer racing program when it comes to the
only as well
LMDH program. Yeah, the only. I know that they just announced a pause for next season on new customers, but that doesn't exclude the potential for anything beyond that. And like I said, McLaren so far has been very on and off on whether or not they would actually race in the hypercar slash GTP category in the future. So if that was their intention, unless they know something that I don't, which is potentially true, then I don't think that that would be a primary reason for that change. What about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna take the opposite sort of position from what you were saying there. I
That's why
think
you're here.
that yeah, that's why I'm here. We gotta. It wouldn't be fun if we just agreed all the time. Um, I think that the move from, if we want to look at this purely from the possibility of running a GTP entry in the future, completely understanding, yes, that the McLaren is absolutely no guarantee at this point. There's a very good chance it's more. It's probably a higher percent chance it doesn't happen than it does happen. Although I have nothing to back that up. But if you are in FAF's shoes and assuming that both programs are going to have a GTP eligible car in the future, if you look at for FAF, they're hopping on board with McLaren, and they could have an opportunity to basically become the factory program for that McLaren in North America. Probably not in the WEC, but if McLaren does go through with this hypercar, then they would probably assume the role of factory program, and that would be amazing for them. That's an opportunity that they would not have. They would not have that opportunity with Porsche, and being able to potentially develop that car with McLaren as well, and all the value that would bring to their team and their program, and just further elevate that entire team to another level, is that could be very tempting. Now, that being said, looking at exactly what it translates to for this season, GTP completely separate. Making the switch from Porsche, who they've raced with forever, to McLaren, who they also do have a very good relationship with, I'm sure wasn't easy. But for the reasons that you mentioned, I know we've talked about this in the past. There's well-known struggles with Porsche right now around being able to produce the car physically. And I don't think the manufacturing has resumed on that car yet. And going to McLaren and being able to work maybe a bit more closely with the manufacturer may have been something that FAF couldn't pass up. And we're never gonna truly know the answer to this. Maybe we'll get a little bit more clarity if a McLaren LMH program is ever announced, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of excitement there. I know the team has definitely been having a lot of fun with it. If you haven't seen any of their social media posts, they have some very amusing ones that they've been putting out recently. But I think it's an exciting time for them, and fingers crossed that we get to see a McLaren eventually on the grid.
It's one of those things I would be very happy if I'm wrong about. We'll say that.
Yeah.
Another question from Fabian Madrid 6845 from YouTube last week. Should GT3 cars feature a hybrid system? This is one that I put a little bit of thought into, and I'll try to simplify it. I think for now, no. I think if manufacturer interests change, and this has happened many times in sports car racing where manufacturers are looking for a specific thing to be incorporated into a class, then you might have an argument for it. This is sort of what prototype racing is actually going through right now, where you had the DPI category, which, while it certainly had its fair share of manufacturers at its peak, was starting to dwindle down in its later years. And the introduction of the LMDH formula and the Le Mans Hypercar formula, with hybrids being a key point to both of those formulas, although not required for the Hypercar formula, it's brought a lot more manufacturers on board. So if we reach a similar situation for GT racing, now that GT3 is essentially the primary GT class around the world in every championship, Yeah, I think that that's a discussion that might have to be made down the road. But for now, I think that GT3 has plenty of manufacturer support, and I don't really see that dying anytime in the next couple of years. So for now, I'd say that they are perfectly fine sitting where they are. From a racing aspect, there's been GT hybrids in the past. In fact, you can look even back to the late 90s, we had hybrids racing in GT ranks, but I don't really see it as anything that would boost the product that GT3 is providing right now, which, by the way, is, I think, one of the best GT racing formulas around the world. Well, I guess that it would have to be now that it's one of the only GT racing formulas around the world. But even with the peak of GTE, GT3 was still putting up some fantastic racing.
Yeah, when I read this question, the only thing that came into my head was the cost.
Yeah.
You're associating a hybrid system with the GT3 formula is probably going to increase costs quite a bit, even if it's a spec hybrid system. And with the GT3 program is supposed to evolve around keeping costs a little bit more manageable. That's largely one of the things that killed GTE was just the extreme costs that were associated with it and how those costs kept escalating. So I think that that's another big factor in why I don't think we'll see GT3 cars with a hybrid for a little while, if ever.
Yeah, definitely. I can't believe I didn't mention that. Like you said, costs for GT3 right now, GT3 is supposed to be far more than even LMDH, which we already hype up as being a very cheap way to get into prototype racing. GT3 is supposed to be very cheap and customer friendly. And as you said, it's going to increase costs if they even had a spec hybrid system, which, by the way, I think that's another question. How would you incorporate hybrids into that formula? I think that's something that somebody like the SRO group, in conjunction with maybe the FIA, would have to have a sit down and discuss how they'd want to incorporate that, whether it's a spec hybrid system. I think it would probably have to be a spec hybrid system because I can't envision a scenario where manufacturers would be pouring money into their own hybrid power units that would just drive up costs even higher. But I think that would be a little bit more complicated because you have GT3 cars racing in vastly more categories throughout the world than we currently have with LMDH cars. So that's my 5 cents on it, or my 2 cents on it. And we'll see, though. Maybe someday down the road.
Well, it could be 5 cents if they introduce hybrids, price increases.
Oh, yeah.
I'll take the next question here. And that is, that was actually on the call for this week's questions. And don't forget, if you want to get your questions in for next week, then we always post something on Twitter, or sorry, X, pardon me. And then I always throw it up on the YouTube community feed as well. So get your questions in, and we could answer them on the next show. This one's from Next Year 523 on YouTube. Not super related, but do you guys think DTM could have adopted the GTE regulations? They sounded like a good middle ground between Class 1 and GT3. I mean, the DTM if they're going through a bit of a lean period, it hasn't been a great couple of years for them, but is there enough? Is there going to be enough spare parts? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll say I don't think so, because I think that by the time DTM was looking for a new solution, the writing was already on the wall with DTM, or with GTE rather, that the manufacturer support was starting to dwindle. And like you said, GTE was largely based around factory programs. Now, of course, there were customer programs in the GTE AM class, and we certainly had a lot more customer programs back in the GT2 days. But I think in its later years, it was really the cars were a lot more complicated than they once were when it was the GT2 class. By the way, video coming on that soon. I know I've promised that for a while, but hashtag soon. All right. I just don't think that would have worked. I'll tell you what, I know this isn't a DTM podcast and I don't want to talk too long about it, but I really, really wish the Class 1 regulations did work, because I think that was really a perfect solution that didn't really get the chance to mature into what it could have been. And it really does upset me to see DTM as a GT3 only series, because I think there's plenty of... I love GT3 racing. I really do. But there's plenty of GT3 championships around the world. And I think what made DTM special was the added speed that we saw, just having those GT car... I guess they were... What do you want to call them? Touring cars, but they were sort of based around GT cars. That were a lot faster than what we see with GT3 cars or even GTE cars. And I think Class 1 with the GT500 incorporation of that was a great solution, but alas, didn't stand the test of time.
I think another factor in this too is sure, BMW and Porsche, they both had GTE cars that they produced, but were you going to get Mercedes and Audi going out and producing producing a GTE car, which, you know, those, I think it's probably pretty safe to say those are like the core four manufacturers that have been in DTM for a while. Of course, it being a German-based series, so yeah, I feel like GT3 was probably the reasonable way to go to incorporate them. But and then a follow-up question from next year as well. What are your guys' thoughts on customer cars? To me, they're the most important thing right now, as they're the future of GTP hypercar class when manufacturers pull their factory program. So I assume this question is revolving around customer, LMDH / hypercar entries as opposed to customer GT entries. What are your thoughts? Obviously, customer entries are great, but
they're great. But I've also said many times that they're very important. Like you said, exactly when, because this is not a question of if, this is when the customer programs depart from the series, which will eventually happen. Just look at what history tells you. It's the customer teams that are holding up the series. I implore you to see what the 24 Hours of Le Mans would have looked like in the LMP1 era if we didn't have Rebellion Racing, if we didn't have Ginetta or SMP or Dragon Speed. You would have had Toyota literally racing by themselves for a good 4 to 5 seasons. So what I've always said is that IMSA and the WEC right now are in a very tough... Well, I wouldn't say quite as much IMSA, because I feel like they're still doing a pretty good job at accommodating customers. With the WEC, they have the obvious issue of simply not having enough room on the grid. And I know that the result of that is, the easy thing is, push the customer hypercars out. Because I'll say customer, but I'm talking about the boutique manufacturers, the Glickenhauses of the world, the Van Walls of the world. Because they don't generate as much fan interest. They are not as strong when it comes to actually contending for the podiums and the race wins. And I think that they're an easy target to say, listen, they're some cars that we can pretty much ignore for now. But it's a very tough stance to take, because there will be a time where you're counting on those manufacturers. And I don't think that there's this conspiracy to kick those teams out of the championship. Far from it. It just feels like oftentimes in sports car racing, when there's a peak like we're in right now, it seems like those smaller customer programs and or boutique manufacturers are the ones that typically get the boot first. And I would hope that championships are doing everything that they can to try to accommodate those teams, because there will be a time, as I've said 3 times now, there will be a time down the road where we're really looking for those teams and manufacturers to be on the grid. And I could say the same thing for GT racing as well. If you look at GTE, when all of the factory GTE teams left, we were left with GTEM in the FIA WEC this year, which, by the way, still put on a fantastic show at every single race. And next year, GT is going to be an AM class only, as it was this year, but GT3 in the WEC is going to be an AM focused class. So when all the factory teams head out, you're still going to have that backbone to rest on while you try to get those manufacturers back.
Now, do you think a reasonable, maybe option for customer hypercar or LMDH entries in the future? I mean, it's clear that there's not space on the WEC grid right now. Do you think that we could see it included in European Le Mans series or a spin-off onto sort of another sort of support series? Or do you think that, the WEC has to find this grid space to accommodate more customer hypercars?
The short answer is I don't know. If I could just wave a wand and say, boom, we can get 60 cars on the WEC grid, that'd be fantastic. But obviously we don't live in that world. So I really don't see the ELMS adopting a hypercar class that would accommodate those smaller manufacturers. I don't really think those manufacturers would want to be relegated to only racing in the ELMS. It's like I said, it's a tough call right now. When you have maximum capacity grids, somebody's going to have to get the boot. And it's probably always going to be those smaller teams and manufacturers that are the first ones out. I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot else to add, unfortunately, because I don't have the solution for it. But it's just something that I always want to make a point of, is that you have to keep an eye out for those smaller manufacturers and those privateer teams. Curious if you had any other thoughts on that.
No, I think I echo what you've said. I think this is definitely going to be something to keep an eye on over the next few years, how customer entries are incorporated into the grids, because as you mentioned, they are a necessity. When the factories inevitably pull out, somebody's still got to be there to race. So keep an eye out for years to come, I guess. Sit and wait.
Sit and wait. Wait and see. Let's see. Moving on with the questions from before the episode. By the way, we got a lot of, which is fantastic. Regarding manufacturers at Le Mans, do you think Mercedes will finally budge and build a hypercar eventually, or keep lobbying to get into LMGT3? The FIA and ACO are definitely structuring their manufacturer rules as they are for a reason, forcing fence sitters to commit to a new rule set. Couple quick points there. I really don't expect Mercedes to be racing in the LMGT3 class next season. I don't think they're going to keep trying to budge their way in. We'll officially get that announced next Monday. As for a hypercar, I would love to see them try to build a hypercar based on the AMG 1. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think that would really be something cool to see. The main reason I don't think it's going to happen is I think Mercedes is simply too invested in Formula 1 and GT3 right now. And you can still speak to the success of both of those programs. I think they have one of the best GT3 customer programs around right now. And certainly, even though their Formula 1 team has been on a bit of a back burner not back burner, but they've been struggling the past couple of seasons, they're still one of the top teams. And it's still a very expensive program for them to look after. So I don't expect to see them in the hypercar category, at least for the next few seasons. It'd be great if we did. And I think that maybe if they did, that's when we might try to see them find their way into the GT3 class as well. But we also might be in a situation in a couple of seasons where they are able to get some entries into the GT3 class without having a hypercar. It all just sort of depends how the manufacturers and teams shuffle around in that class.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we're going to see Mercedes hypercar anytime soon, if ever. But I think they maybe hang around and wait and see if there's going to be some more grid space that opens up on the WEC grid, whether in the form of an expanded grid from the WEC, if they can work out some logistics to accommodate more cars for their season, or as you mentioned, if we start to see maybe a little bit of a downtick in the number of entries that are on the grid, and they're able to get a couple of cars on the grid. But I don't know if we're going to see a hypercar anytime soon.
Which, by the way, they already have announced that their plan
Yep.
is to expand to 40 cars for 2025. So perhaps with that, depending on what the hypercar interest looks like and what GT3 interest looks like from other manufacturers, maybe that's where we see a manufacturer like Mercedes slot in. Like I said, they have no shortage of talent with GT3 customer programs, so I certainly think they could be a front runner if there is a situation like that.
And they are committed to building a new GT3 car, I believe, as well. I think they've announced that I think that it's already underway for 2025, if I'm not mistaken.
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
We have an early call prediction here from Spartan TV 6268.
Oh, yes.
Who do you think has the best shot to, I'm guessing this is win GTP for the 24 Hours of Daytona?
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I haven't put any thought into this. It is November. And I'll probably give some more thought out predictions later on as we get closer to that race and start doing an official preview. But I don't know. I'd like to say a manufacturer like Acura has been especially strong at Daytona the past few seasons. And we just talked earlier in this episode about how strong Wayne Taylor Racing's lineup has been. Maybe 2024 is the year that somebody finally breaks that Acura streak, but I still think Acura is a very strong car, and I think that they're still the ones to beat.
You took my pick, so I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm going to go with the team that I think may have been the favorite going into last year, or the manufacturer that may have been the favorite going into last year's race in Porsche. I think that they have, maybe aside from BMW, have progressed. They progressed the most last year, especially in terms of reliability. And we saw them come on really strong in the second half of last season. And I think I'm gonna roll with Porsche for the Rolex in the way too early prediction portion of the show.
Yeah, you can look smart in a couple of months if you're right.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll clip it.
Oh yeah. Last question here from before the show is about the remaining seats in the GTP lineup for the Rolex. Do you think that one of the two drivers to be announced later on BMW, assuming this is their prototype program, can be Raffaele Marciello? I think he he wasn't announced yet because he was under contract with AMG. As of course, Macau FIA GT World Cup winner from this year, Raffaele Marciello, in his final GT3 outing for Mercedes. So we'll answer that question first. First question I had for you, Stu. Has BMW formally said that they will have 4 drivers at the Rolex? Now, I know that the entry list came out for the Rolex 24 next year, which shows all the cars that will be on the grid, but not all the drivers. And there are 2 TBA slots for both BMW GTP cars. Now, I don't know if that means BMW is committed to having 4 drivers in both cars, or if that means that they just aren't sure yet. If that's the case, I'll be honest, I haven't really put much thought into it. I'm not sure if that's where Raffaele Marciello might end up. It would be interesting, although I don't know. I'm trying to think if their WEC lineups have been finalized yet, if there would really be a place for him to slot in. Because the only reason I could see him racing for BMW in the Rolex, well, I suppose if he raced as a BMW factory driver, there might be a spot for him if he was racing for them in the GT3 ranks. But I don't know. I feel like that might be something that we see some of their WEC drivers end up in instead. What about you?
I have a feeling that BMW will probably have a 4th driver for the 24 and the 25. Last year, their 4th driver was Colton Herta for both entries.
Yep.
You raised a really good point that they very well might use this as an opportunity for some of their WEC drivers to get a little bit of extra seat time. But on that same, by that same sort of path of logic, that could be a great opportunity for Marcello to get more seat time as well. He's just finishing up his contract with Mercedes. He's just finished his last race with them, and what better way to get a lot of experience under your belt than being thrown into the fire at the Rolex 24 with in one of those entries. So the on one shoulder, maybe the smart side of my body, it's telling me it's probably going to be, as you mentioned, a couple of their WEC drivers getting some extra seat time. But on the other shoulder, I'm very much hoping that we see him in one of those, either the 24 or the 25. And again, just another great driver that would be added to this grid and getting some more great seat time. Of course, it's not confirmed yet that he'd be signing with BMW either at this point. So there's a couple of puzzle pieces that need to fall into place. But
of course,
that would be certainly a very exciting storyline if that all came to fruition.
Yep. And then I will give you the honors of taking the last question of those of the pre-show questions.
Yeah. Oh, actually, there's one more, I think.
Is there?
After that? Yeah. But before we get to that, the second question that Endurance Sports Car Racing had for us: do you think that Dane Cameron could be the third driver for Proton competition in the GTP class at Daytona?
Again, I'm not a pundit, but I think it could make sense, maybe. Of course, Joseph Newgarden will be returning in the number 7 car for next year, and both of the Porsche Penske lineups are full of they're filled to 4-car lineups. The JDC Porsche is filled to a 4-car team, leaving only the 59 Proton car as the only other potential Porsche where we might see Dane Cameron slot in. And of course, being a Porsche factory driver, that is the only prototype that we might see him in if he's racing in the GTP ranks. So I'll say possibly. I don't really see any reason why he couldn't. But yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot else to add.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's, if we're gonna see him in the GTP class, then that's probably the only spot that we would see him on. Because I don't think he definitely wouldn't be out as a Porsche factory driver. I couldn't see that happening.
Oh, no.
So yeah, I think that'd be a great landing spot for him with Proton, to be honest. And the way that Proton was coming on at the end of last year, that could be a nice little bump to their program, even if it's just for the Rolex.
Yep. All right, the last question. I've made my window too small here. I can't read it. Will all the driver lineups for each team in the WEC be confirmed when the entry list is revealed, or will some teams' lineups be released with the entry list, with other teams announcing their drivers during the winter? So it will be the latter. We're not going to have all the drivers confirmed next Monday. There will be lineups. I know Lamborghini especially mentioned that they won't be announcing their driver lineups until I think at least next month at the earliest. So don't expect to see all the driver lineups on day one, although it will give us a good indication as to what teams will be on the grid. And then from there, we get to do some speculating, which is always fun on this podcast.
Oh, we don't speculate at all, do we?
Rubbish. All right. So going to take the end of the episode here to ask some of the questions from the live chat.
Yes.
The first one I saw being from next year. Actually, speaking of McLaren, why have there been so few 720S GT3s on the grid? Are they pricey? When you look at GT3 racing, there's quite a different approach that manufacturers seem to take. There are some manufacturers, Porsche, Mercedes, BMW maybe as well, and Audi, I guess if you want to look at the past, who have been very open about having customer programs and having perhaps as many customer teams as possible. And that seems to have been the business model that they operated under. Now, of course, they had their main factory-backed programs and factory-supported programs that most of their factory drivers ended up racing for. But beyond that, you had completely customer cars that would fill up the amateur classes as well. There are other manufacturers. I can name McLaren, of course, is one of them. Bentley was one of them in the past as well, where they seem to be a lot more hesitant towards that model, and they try to focus more towards lineups that they seem to have more control over, whether that be just with the driver lineup or trying to keep the cars to as few teams as possible. It seems like the approach that McLaren's taken in the past. Now, of course, I welcome with open arms the addition of FAF in IMSA, and I'm hoping that we see additional McLaren GT3s in IMSA in the future as well, and in the WEC for that matter, if we have the potential of that beyond 2024. But it just seems like for the past, that's been the model that they've been operating under. And it seems like maybe now they're trying to expand that a little bit, and it's good for me to see at least.
Yeah, I think of course, I am not exactly regularly shopping for a McLaren, unfortunately.
Not until this podcast makes it big.
Yeah, that's true. Let's smash the like button. I thought I had heard that they were one of the pricier GT3s at one point, but I don't know exactly how much weight. I have no way to confirm that, of course. But I wonder if you look at it specifically from an IMSA point of view. You're a team in IMSA. You look around you, and there's a heavy presence from BMW in North American GT racing. There's a heavy presence from Mercedes. Up until just a couple of years ago, there was a heavy presence from Audi. And you look at the customer, the support programs that they had in place, and you compare that to maybe a very small program that McLaren might have been offering, solely because, there's not that many entries that are over here. They don't necessarily need to invest in as big of a support program. So I think that's going to sway a lot of teams to lean towards the better support side of it, and maybe that played into a reason why we haven't seen a lot of McLarens on the grid. But who knows? Maybe we'll start to see some changes in the future. I mean, at the end of the day, if a car's winning and a car's performing, then teams are going to look at that car and they're going to say, "Oh, I want to win too. I'm going to get the McLaren." So, I don't know. I guess it's to the support piece. It's kind of a question of what comes first. Is it the chicken or the egg? Do you put the support program in place and then hope that the customer entries come, or do you sell the cars first and then put the customer support system in place? So regardless, it's good to see another McLaren full-time on the grid next year.
Yeah. Also another question from next year as well. In your opinions, who's got the best GTP lineup at the moment? Now, I won't say it's very strictly here because I try to be as unbiased as possible. What I will say is if you look at the number 31 Whelen Cadillac Action Express lineup next season, especially with the recent pickup of Tom Blomqvist for the endurance races, I think that is an especially strong driver lineup that maybe might not get noticed quite as much. You got Pippo Durrani, Jack Aiken, and Tom Blomqvist in that car for next year. And if you're just looking at the endurance driver alone, I know Tom Blomqvist was pretty much the driver who put out the performance at the Rolex 24 this year in the GTP class, especially at the end of that race in the Meyer Shank Acura that was running within the regulations. So I would say that they're definitely one of the stronger lineups that some people might not look that far into, but that's not to discount any of the other lineups. I mean, you have a phenomenal assortment of talent, both the full season and for the endurance races in the GTP class right now. And the fact that we're getting full-time IndyCar drivers, former F1 champions to join the ranks and still face some fierce competition, I think speaks volumes to that.
Oh man, you took my pick again.
Let's go.
This is rough. Here I am frantically scanning down the driver lineups, trying to pick one.
Great minds
I
think alike, eh?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I was leaning towards the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing entry, and I think the thought process in my mind was, this is the car that is, well, they haven't, I guess they didn't win last year's Rolex, but they've been very strong in Rolexes of years past, in championships of years past. And I know that we're putting what's the best overall lineup. Not what's the best lineup for the Rolex 24, but you know what? I'm gonna majorly weight this. Is majorly? Yeah, majorly is a word.
Yeah.
I'm gonna heavily weight this towards the Rolex 24, and I'm gonna go with the number 40 Wayne Taylor Racing entry. You got Jordan Taylor. Sure, he hasn't been in the top class of prototype racing for a few years, but he has a championship under his belt in the DPI era. And then you also have Luis Delatraz, pretty darn good driver there. Colton Herta, again, pretty darn good driver there. And Jensen Button, he hasn't done anything in racing. We have definitely not talked about him very much on this show. So I'll go with the number 40, but I'll echo what you said. And there's so many good lineups on this grid. I think if you were looking at any of these lineups, maybe a handful of years ago, then your jaw might drop. Not that there weren't good lineups a couple years ago, but I feel like this is such a strong grid from top to bottom in GTP. You're not going to go wrong picking one.
Yep. And also, I wanted to make a comment about Jordan Taylor because Wayne Taylor Racing actually had a test at Sebring with both cars.
Yep.
Last week, last week. And I had heard that Jordan Taylor, despite being out of prototypes since, when was the last time he was in a prototype? 2019?
Had to be 18 or 19, somewhere in there.
Somebody can correct us.
Was it when Wayne Taylor was still running Cadillacs? It was
when they were still in Cadillac, but I can't remember the year. I know he was racing for Corvette in 2020. But I'm struggling to remember beyond that. I want to say, I believe it was 2019 was his last year in a DPI car, because I believe he started racing with them at the start of the C8R era, replacing Jan Magnussen. So,
and I think he changed. Did he change over to Corvette because Wayne Taylor Racing was moving away from Cadillac? I don't know if that was switch happened at the same time, or was there a year?
I can't remember.
We're gonna get hung
We're
up
showing our lack of knowledge here. I can't remember if it was 2020, 2021. Those seasons really seem to have just been the same thing at this point. 2020, I think
somewhere in there.
I think 2020 Wayne Taylor ran. When did Penske stop?
I thought
Penske stopped in 2020. 2020 was Penske's last year. So that means Wayne Taylor joined Acura in 2021, which means there was that year buffer. Yep. I can't remember, though. Obviously, Jordan Taylor was a Chevrolet factory or GM factory driver at the time, so he wouldn't have been able to join them at Acura. But if my memory serves me correct, there was that year buffer, and I don't know if that was the exact reason. Point is, I went off track there.
Oh, we went way off track.
It's been a few seasons, at least, since Jordan Taylor's been in a prototype. And at Sebring at the test, apparently he was up to speed almost immediately again, showing zero indication that he was ever out of a prototype, especially for his first laps in a new LMDH car. So really looking forward to seeing what he can throw on the track next season.
Also a pretty good Ironman competitor as well. I think he ran an Ironman the week before that. So, competed in an Ironman. Yep.
I think the only other chat question I have to go over, so yell at me if I'm wrong and I didn't answer one of your questions. The likelihood of Sebastian Vettel, Jensen Button, and Robert Kubica racing in the Jota Porsche. I know it's been rumored, and I don't believe I've seen a whole lot come out of that since the initial reports were coming out. Now, I didn't look too much into the WEC leaked entry list that supposedly came out today. And I believe from what I had seen that it was only showing the teams and not the cars that were on the grid. So I didn't get a chance to do my math and see how many GTP cars would add up to. I think we said there were going to be, what did we say? How many GTP cars are going to be? 17, 19? I can't remember. We discussed it last episode.
Go back and listen to the last episode.
Yeah, go back and listen because I can't remember. So I'm not sure, but we'll know next week. And I'll tell you what, if there is a full season lineup featuring Sebastian Vettel, Jenson Button, and Robert Kubica, that would be one of the biggest stories for sports car racing to come out of the last couple of years. I know that we're in the midst of a manufacturer boom right now, and we're getting all these manufacturers showing up, but that is around the same level as the announcement that Ferrari would be returning to Le Mans, if you ask me. Just in terms of how many fans all three of those drivers would bring with them, especially Sebastian Vettel, bringing a lot of eyes to sports car racing and the World Endurance Championship in particular. So I would be a huge advocate for that, and I would love to see that car on the grid next year. It is another wait and see. We'll know next Monday, potentially. I'll say this. If we see a second Jota on the entry list next week, that's when I would start to get interested, because I don't know if we would have the full driver lineup announced the same day, but that's when you can start your speculation, I think.
Yeah, that would be an incredible lineup to see on the grid. The number of, as you mentioned, the number of eyeballs that would be tuned into all of those races would that'd be a healthy bump, I'm sure, in viewership.
Yep. So I think that's going to be good, enough to cover it for this episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Stu, I want to leave you with any closing thoughts, though.
Oh, closing thoughts. I feel like I'm still catching my breath from all of the announcements that came out of the IMSA entry list last week.
We only covered half of them.
Yeah, we only covered half of them too. So, if we get another, not that we're expecting many quiet weeks for sports car racing, especially we're just over 2 months away from the Rolex 24 at this point. So it's creeping up, and but hopefully we'll get an opportunity to talk about some of those Pro-Am lineups as well. Of course, next episode with the WEC grid coming out, surely going to be lots to talk about there. If we get that F1 trio of drivers in a Jota Porsche, then oh my heavens, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I don't know how the news outlets would be able to contain themselves, but yeah, I think it's an exciting time, I feel like, for sports car racing right now. Just looking at some of the confirmations that we got in the past week on the IMSA grid, we talked about all the former F1 drivers that are coming, the current IndyCar drivers, some very high profile drivers, high profile teams, and it's getting very exciting that the Rolex is just around the corner, and the WEC season opener is not going to be too long after that either. So even though it's the off season, very exciting time.
Yep. Yeah, and you have a full video out on your channel going over the Rolex 24 entries as well, if you want some additional information that we might not have touched on in this episode. But we still got a decent amount of time left in the off season. I'm sure it'll go by quicker than we think, but I don't think there's going to be any shortage of news for us to go over in the next couple of months before we return to on-track action for sports car racing. So I'm going to say that's enough for this episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you are listening in the United States, hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time for another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Catch you in the next one.